What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got my late rest of season wide receiver rankings for 2020 fantasy football. I've got my top 24 guys at the position the rest of the year and guys that you should hope to have on your teams. Don't forget, this afternoon around 4 p.m. Central, I will be live streaming and answering all of your guys' fantasy football questions. If you have any, so stop by and ask away. I'm available to answer anything you guys have for me, and I'm happy to help you guys out here. So before we get into the video, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Let's hit the intro and get into the rankings. All right, at the number 24 spot here, we've got Chase Claypool, and this one is very simple, and this is a guy who could go a lot higher on this list. He has been excellent this season and has been nothing short of sensational as a rookie in the NFL. He has 10 touchdowns through 10 games played, and for a guy picked in the second round behind some other big names, he has been amazing and probably outperformed those guys. I think Chase Claypool is one of the more impressive rookies and a guy who looks like a seasoned veteran. His amazing speed and size has helped him make some big plays, and he is a monster in the red zone. So Chase Claypool has a very high upside the rest of this season, and when he scores touchdowns, he puts up great fantasy outings. At the number 23 spot, we've got Cooper Kupp, the LA Rams slot wide receiver, and Cooper Kupp has the potential to be a PPR machine the rest of this year. We saw him have his best fantasy outing of the season against Tampa Bay on Monday Night Football, but Cooper Kupp needs to become a little bit more consistent. He is wide receiver 33 right now in half PPR scoring because he's had some very low outings in the season so far this year. But if he can get on track here, Jared Goff really trusts him, and he's probably his favorite wide receiver. But the play call and scheme just favors Robert Woods a little bit more in that offense. But Cooper Kupp has potential to be a very safe floor play and a great wide receiver too the rest of this season. My wide receiver 22 on the list is DJ Moore, the Carolina Panthers star wideout. I think this is actually the most talented player on that Panthers offense behind Christian McCaffrey, and I think the top talent at wide receiver on the team, even over Robbie Anderson. But so far this year, we've seen Teddy Bridgewater defer targets in favor of Anderson. However, last week under PJ Walker, DJ Moore racked in 127 receiving yards and was very impressive against the Lions. It was a great matchup, and going forward, DJ Moore has some more of those coming up. So I really like him the rest of the season. The Panthers have been a very conservative coaching staff in terms of returning players from injury. So I expect Teddy to be used sparingly and not return until he's fully healthy. So I think in the meantime, that benefits DJ Moore. Mike Evans here at wide receiver 21 is a guy who I had nearly written off this season, but the last 4 weeks, Mike Evans has been trending up and his stock is up right now. He does kind of need a touchdown to have a nice ceiling in fantasy because the majority of the targets and the highest count of targets and receptions in the offense are going to Godwin and Antonio Brown. But Mike Evans is still a highly talented player and can put up very productive numbers. He's great down in the red zone, and he can get it done. So he's a guy I'm starting to trust again, and moving forward can be looked at as a high upside wide receiver 2 in your fantasy lineups. My wide receiver 20 for the rest of the season is Kenny Golladay, the Lions wideout. And Kenny Golladay, simply the main thing holding him back here is injuries not only to himself, but all over that Lions offense. Right now, Matt Stafford missed last week, and so did Kenny Golladay, who's been dealing with a hip injury. That's what's going to hold Kenny Golladay back the rest of the season. When he is on the field, they are exceptional, and Detroit has actually struggled to win games when he's not on the field. So the Lions need Kenny Golladay, and Kenny Golladay needs Matt Stafford. So let's hope they can both come back healthy and finish the year off strong, because I think if that happens, Kenny G is a guy who can put up very nice wide receiver 1 numbers. My wide receiver 19 for the rest of the season is Robert Woods, the LA Rams wideout. And I think this is the guy who has emerged as the number 1 option in that offense since the switch to the 12 personnel sets in LA. Sean McVay has went to 2 tight end sets with Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett, and that has allowed the rushing game to improve a lot, and Robert Woods benefits greatly on jet sweeps, end arounds, and other screen passes. The amount of usage Woods gets in that offense is highly valuable to fantasy and gives him a really safe floor. And we see what he can do with the ball in his hands. He had a great game against the Bucs. He has a fairly high ceiling as well when he can break away and get in the end zone. So Robert Woods, I really trust him the rest of the season. And for a high-powered Rams offense and a very well-coached team, this is a solid play in all formats. Diontae Johnson is my wide receiver 18 for the rest of the year. and this is a guy whose value is skyrocketing right now. He has had back-to-back 100-yard performances and 3 straight games of 6+ receptions. He is going crazy right now, and he's almost a perfect fit to replace that Antonio Brown role in that Steelers offense. I'm not saying Diontae Johnson is Antonio Brown. I'm not saying this guy is as talented or has the pedigree that AB had when he was in his prime with the Steelers, but Diontae Johnson looks great in that offense. No one drafts wide receivers better than the Steelers do, and he is showing that. He's excellent. He can make big plays happen down the field, and he is starting to become more and more consistent. So let's hope he can keep the work up here and continue to be a fantasy stud. I love Johnson the rest of the season. Justin Jefferson is my wide receiver 17 for the rest of the season, and he is my favorite rookie wide receiver to watch. As a Packer fan here, you can see by the jacket, Justin Jefferson is amazing to watch and a guy who is really entertaining. As a rookie, this guy looks like a 3 to 4 year seasoned veteran. He is making plays that I would not expect to see from a rookie wideout in any year under any given circumstances. And considering the offseason we've had in the limited training camp, this guy has blown expectations out of the water. Justin Jefferson at the point of attack is excellent. His routes are excellent, and his run after the catch ability is excellent as well. This guy is a high-level fantasy producer, and I think someday is just going to dominate the league. We've seen him completely dominate secondaries against teams like Atlanta that he did earlier this season. The Vikings still ended up managing to lose that game, I believe, but Justin Jefferson was phenomenal. This is an offense in Minnesota right now that is humming and trending upwards. The running game and passing game has been highly efficient the last couple weeks, so I expect Justin Jefferson to finish the year strong. And then coming in one spot ahead of him at wide receiver 16, I have his teammate Adam Thielen. And right now, I think it's fair to maybe assume that you could flip-flop these guys. Adam Thielen just landed on the COVID reserve list, so he might not be eligible for a couple weeks. But Adam Thielen is surging right now in fantasy football. 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and one of those performances was a 2-score game against the Bears, who have a very sound defensive unit. Thielen's been a PPR stud for a few years now. He racks in receptions and does not drop passes. This guy is a very nice safety blanket and can make plays down the field as well. So I really like Adam Thielen the rest of this year in a nice Vikings schedule. Coming in at wide receiver 15, I've got Will Fuller. And for a guy who is kind of stepping into that DeAndre Hopkins role from a season ago, he's done just about as good of a job as you could have expected from this guy. I mean, he's no DeAndre Hopkins, but Will Fuller is still highly talented and a guy who has put up very nice fantasy numbers. He's got 6 touchdowns in his last 8 games and has shown that he can produce wide receiver 1 numbers in fantasy. It'll be really interesting to see what the Texans do with him this offseason as an impending free agent. I'm wondering if they'll bring him back and offer him a contract or if they'll let him walk, but I think it's a mistake to let him do so. I think him and Deshaun Watson have a very special connection together. And even though the schedule gets a little bit tougher here on the stretch of the two, I think Will Fuller continues to be a productive fantasy play. My wide receiver 14 for the rest of the 2020 season is Tyler Lockett, and this is a guy who just has a sensational connection with Russell Wilson. These two are great together in the red zone, down the field, or connecting on a check down. They make it look special each and every time, and Tyler Lockett is a very shifty guy. He can fly down the field and make big plays happen. He's been a little bit streaky this year, but I expect Tyler Lockett to get back on track and continue to be a wide receiver 1. He is still one of the top wide receivers in fantasy despite having some very quiet games. But I think Tyler Lockett will become more consistent down the stretch here. Seattle will continue to have to throw the ball down the field and push the pace offensively to keep up with their lacking defense. Tyler Lockett, I think, has the potential to finish as a wide receiver 1 in 2020. Chris Godwin is my wide receiver 13 for the rest of the season, and this is a guy that I think perfectly fits the mold for Tom Brady. I've been saying this for a couple weeks now. Chris Godwin is your guy who catches the underneath and intermediate passing routes and runs after the catch and makes plays happen with his own legs. I think Tom Brady and Bruce Arians need to get on the same page a little bit here. TB12 has been having his turnovers when he's trying to push the ball down the field. He's making errant mistakes that way. So I think they need to get back to what Tom Brady does well, and that's read the field, find the open guy underneath, and make the safe play and let them run after the catch. Chris Godwin could become a PPR monster if that's the case. I think this guy is highly talented. He should have the opportunity to get back into form of somewhat of the guy we saw last season. He won't be nearly the producer because he doesn't have Jameis Winston chucking him the ball 50 yards down the field 4 times a game, but Chris Godwin will still be an elite level producer. Allen Robinson is my wide receiver 12 for the rest of the season, and A-Rob has been simply one of my favorite wideouts all season long. This guy has a super safe floor. I've talked about this over and over again. But for a guy who has a schedule in the postseason as great as A-Rob does, I love his matchups coming up here. And the only real question mark with A-Rob is the quarterback play. Will Nick Foles be the starter, or will we see Mitchell Trubisky return to the field? I think that's a question we have to wait and see play out in the coming weeks here. I'm not sure what Coach Matt Nagy is going to decide to do there. But nonetheless, Allen Robinson, for me, is the only dependable wide receiver or offensive weapon in that Bears offense in terms of fantasy football and in real life, honestly. Robinson is one of the top wide receiver talents in the league and needs to be respected and put into lineups down the stretch of the year. My wide receiver 11 is Julio Jones, the Falcons wide receiver, and I had to knock him down the list here simply because of the hamstring injury he sustained last week. And that's an injury that can be really detrimental for a wide receiver's play the rest of the year. Hamstrings are really bothersome. If you have a hamstring injury, and you guys have ever had one before, you know you can't really run the same. You can't have the same physicality and play with the same intensity as whether you were healthy. So Julio Jones, I think, is a very tough guy. He's a gamer. He's going to try and push through this injury. He's been listed as a game-time decision for Week 12. But I think this injury is going to slow him down a little bit, and that is enough to knock him down the rankings for me. You'll see his teammate Calvin Ridley is actually higher up on the list for that reason. Obviously, we know how talented Julio is. This guy is still regarded as the top wide receiver talent in the league by many. I think that he's certainly up in that top 3 discussion. But Julio Jones, like I said, that injury I think is going to hold him back a little bit, so we have to be cautious with him. He's still a must-start player when he's on the field, but I think in terms of rankings, he moves down a little bit because of caution. Terry McLaurin gets my wide receiver 10 spot for the rest of the year, and for a second-year breakout player, this guy has been sensational. Terry has literally been immune to quarterback play. He's played with Kyle Allen, Dwayne Haskins, and Alex Smith, and been fantastic with all 3 of those guys on the field. He has maintained a high level of fantasy performance week in and week out, regardless of matchup, and he is quickly becoming one of the more dependable wide receivers in fantasy football. I love this guy the rest of the season. Terry was an absolute steal in draft day, and a guy that you guys are probably really happy about if he's on your teams. Terry is a must-start player going forward, and I don't care who he's playing. He deserves the start in your lineups. My wide receiver 9 for the rest of the season is Michael Thomas, the Saints wideout. And finally, we've been waiting for this day for 11 weeks here in this fantasy season. Michael Thomas finally showed that he is capable of doing something similar to what he did last season. And even with Taysom Hill at quarterback, we saw Taysom Hill only throw 23 passes, but Michael Thomas still hauled in a nice number of receptions, and he had a nice yardage total as well against a weak Atlanta secondary. But I think he's finally getting into a groove, and once Drew Brees returns down the stretch, I think he can have a lot of nice numbers. So Michael Thomas, he's showing that he can produce even with a backup quarterback. He has a really great schedule down the rest of the season here. So MT, a guy I'm excited about going forward. I hope he can continue the success and put up nice numbers for your lineups. My wide receiver 8 here is Calvin Ridley, and we're seeing him kind of ascend into the wide receiver 1 position on that team. I'm not too optimistic Julio is going to go this week. I think he might try and push through it, but at the end of the day, if he doesn't go, Calvin Ridley is a guy who's going to put up great numbers. Even as a 1A, if you will, in that Falcons offense, he's been highly productive and a guy with elite talent out of Alabama. So I think Calvin Ridley, with all the skill sets and tools he has, can be a high-level producer for your teams the rest of the season and a guy to depend on down the stretch, regardless of Julio on the field or not. I've got A.J. Brown here at wide receiver 7, and this is a guy, we just saw him play bully ball against the Ravens secondary last week. That was a very tough unit defensively, and he literally carried Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters into the end zone on a touchdown, and he ran through them on another catch as well. He's not being used in a high-volume situation, but this is a guy after the catch who is dominant, and in a run-first offense, A.J. Brown still continues to be an elite wide receiver 1 producer. If he suited up for all games this season, he would be ridiculous and off the charts statistically. He's one of the highest producers in a fantasy points per game basis and a guy that can be depended on in your lineups going forward. He also has a very nice playoff schedule and is a guy I'm excited about here the rest of the season. A.J. Brown is a guy I expect to shoot up draft boards in 2021. Stefon Diggs here at wide receiver 6 is probably the shocker of the year at wide receiver. This guy was not being picked like a top 10 wideout in fantasy football this season, but boy has he ever produced. I mean, Stefon Diggs has been one of the more impressive guys in the entire league from a talent-wise perspective as well. Him and Josh Allen have been the perfect matchup. I actually kind of had the feeling this might happen in the offseason, but I never really capitalized on it in draft day. But Stefon Diggs over the top with Josh Allen has been such an electric duo. Those guys have hit on so many home run balls and have been so effective underneath as well. This is by far Stefon Diggs' best career season. I think he has a long-term home in Buffalo. I can't wait to see what him and Josh Allen are going to do together the rest of their careers. I think this is a great pairing and a duo that is going to be leaned on heavily in the playoffs here. You guys should be able to continue to lean on Stefon Diggs in your lineups and hope he produces those top-end numbers because he's done nothing but that all season long and been one of the more consistent players in fantasy as well. So for a wide receiver one in that offense in Buffalo, he has been fantastic and a guy I'm really excited about the rest of this year. DK Metcalf comes in at my wide receiver 5 for me for the rest of the 2020 season, and this guy has been nothing short of sensational. Since draft day, he has proved all the doubters wrong, and this is the closest thing we've ever seen to Calvin Johnson on the field. I mean, the size, the speed, and the development he showed in his route running ability has been amazing. This guy was looked at as just a field stretcher coming out of the draft, but he is able to do so much more on that team. He's dominant at the point of attack. He runs through defenders, and it's just a physical player. I mean, DK Metcalf might be one of the more talented wide receivers in the NFL and a guy in the top 3 discussion in a year or two here. So DK Metcalf, the rest of the season, along with the fact that he's paired with Russell Wilson, is just an elite fantasy option. He's another one of those guys, just like A.J. Brown, his former teammate at Ole Miss. They don't need a high volume of receptions to get the job done. These guys can get it done in 3 or 4 catches. They're that good after the catch and down the field. They can produce elite numbers on limited receptions and targets. Keenan Allen at the wide receiver 4 spot is another guy who I think was an absolute draft day shocker. I mean, coming into the season, the concern was warranted. Keenan Allen in an offense that was expected to be led by Tyrod Taylor. We were all considering to have a down year and regression from a Phillip Rivers-led offense. But the early insertion of Justin Herbert has really amplified his targets and his production in fantasy football and on the field. Keenan Allen just gets peppered with targets every week, and this guy is a PPR stud. His floor is so safe because of all those looks he gets and all those catches. He's one of the best route runners in the league. I'd say him and Davante Adams might be the top 2 guys in that category. He has great hands as well and has been scoring touchdowns at a nice clip. This is a guy who I think gets the nudge over Metcalf simply because of dependability, and that volume makes me a little bit more comfortable with him. I think Metcalf has the higher ceiling, but Keenan Allen is a guy I trust more with his floor, and that's why he gets the nudge here. Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 3 for the rest of 2020. This is a guy who has also been sensational this season, and we've almost grown used to this situation. Him and Pat Mahomes have been so good together throughout the course of their careers. I mean, Tyreek Hill is having a great season, and I don't think it's being talked about enough. Him and Pat Mahomes have just been doing this so routinely that it's just to be expected at this point. Tyreek Hill is, they call him Cheetah for a reason. He can break over the top at any point and score a 50 to 60 yard touchdown in a blink of an eye. So Hill is a guy who has a great upside the rest of the season. That Chiefs offense is elite, and he is one of the top guys in that offense. I think Hill will continue to produce during the fantasy playoffs and put up those elite numbers that we've been seeing all year long. This guy can win some championships if he continues to have these monster ceiling games and put up big numbers for your teams. DeAndre Hopkins comes in at my number 2 wide receiver spot here, and this is a guy I expected to be a top 5 producer at the wide receiver position this year, but I was wrong about how high his ceiling would be. I expected him to come down slightly from his time in Houston in production because the lack of off-season training and the lack of preseason that we saw this year. I expected the chemistry and rapport to be nowhere close to what it is right now with Kyler Murray. Those two have been electric all year long, and Murray has been feeding him the football. DeAndre Hopkins clearly is proving he is still one of the top wide receiver talents in the league, and he is still producing those top-end numbers that we saw with him in Houston. So DeAndre Hopkins, he's great the rest of this season. He's going to continue to be fed the ball, and Kyler Murray is going to continue to put big plays on the field for him. So D-Hop, instant start. This guy's great the rest of the year, and if you have him on your teams, that is a huge bonus for you. Davante Adams has been my wide receiver 1 the entire year for me in fantasy for 2020, and he's only played 8 games so far of the 11 total possible games he could have suited up for, and Davante Adams is still second in the NFL in touchdown passes and number 1 in yards per game. Davante Adams is averaging over 100 yards per contest, and just having an electric season. Him and Aaron Rodgers are the heart and soul of that Packers offense. These guys get it done week in and week out, and Davante Adams is an elite level fantasy producer. If I recall correctly, no one has more reception touchdowns than Davante Adams since 2016. He has been a red zone monster and a guy used heavily down there inside the 20-yard line. So Davante Adams, his routes are exceptional. This guy gets open almost every play. He gets a lot of targets per game, a lot of catches, and a lot of yards. And he's a guy you can lean on to carry the load for your squads the rest of this season. Those are my top 24 wide receivers for the rest of the 2020 fantasy football season. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you haven't already, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel and turn that bell on so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new video. Don't forget about my live stream later this afternoon, where I'll be answering as many of your guys' questions as I can and having a live fantasy football dialogue with you guys. So stay tuned for that. But until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.